I'm here tonight to share kind of an overview of the executive summary. We are on our final edits of the optimization report. I shared this with Mary a couple of times as we finalized some of the details, but the final report, not counting the appendix or any of the attachments, it's about 53 pages of data. So as I've shared with Mary, it's beefy. And part of that reason is because the stakeholders, and I'm going to say that generically, meaning everybody, contributed and had a lot to say. And it's simultaneously very good and complimentary, but also with a bit of fear and trepidation, because they recognize how important getting this is right. That doesn't mean there's universal agreement, but there's at least consensus there's an issue. And I will tell you, dating back to the first time I was in the district, I think in late February, early March, I shared with Mary that I feel as though that people are aware of what's happening and what the stakes are. So that's incredible. So I'm gonna buzz through this. I've only got about 9 slides. It's not going to be as comprehensive as Dr. Tim's report from last meeting, but that's Rick. And we're going to get to some of the numbers. So Kyle, if you would be so kind of advance. So current strengths, as folks know, when I came, I talked to them about strengths and frustrations, but the strengths in this district are vibrant, they're visible, they're palpable, and they're real. You can wrap your arms around it, and even the areas that are less strengths but still positives, there was some incredible vibes that were coming from the kids and the faculty and the staff and the community members throughout this process. So academic excellence, it is not an expectation, it's a reality. Your staff, your board, your support personnel, from cafeteria and food services to buildings and grounds and transportation, everybody in the middle of all of that recognizes that your job is about academics, and they get it. They also love the fact that personal attention is paramount in everything that happens in this district. Small class sizes, collegiality, family are the trends that everyone was expressing throughout this process. Now with small schools, and when kids are together for too long, that can be a negative, but it's not yet reached that point. As one of the kids said, I love my school, I love that it's small, but I hate that it's so small. And as I've said before, we start with the kids and we end with the adults, and then in the middle, it really gels and coalesces around some really key themes. They love the family environment here. It's one of your strongest core beliefs, and that's important for any decision moving forward. There is an incredibly strong primary elementary education foundation, and that shows in your standardized tests, it shows in your behavioral data, it shows in the family connections to the district. As one of the adults said, once you come to GD, you don't leave. And that's a powerful statement of commitment and connection with this community. And there is a deep community connection. And I know that Mary was worried, and we were a little worried too about, a week left into the survey, and we only had about 10 survey responses. And then we did a blitz, and family comes through, just like when you're having an issue, a flat tire, or you got a leak, or your car breaks down. You call the family and they rally. And then we ended up with 98 survey individuals that participated. For your population, that is a staggeringly high number in terms of standardized survey data. We were hoping for about 1 to 2%, which would have been about 20 or 30. So again, the GD family rallies and shows up when you ask them, and that's an incredibly important thing to remember for the future. Kyle, if you would advance that. Now, if you've got the good, you've got the bad, okay? And I won't say that bad is bad. Bad is just a challenge that you haven't quite figured out an answer to. Course offerings, elementary, K-4, solid. You're giving them the basics. They're coming out with a very strong, rigorous pre-K-4 profile of learners. And that shows in the 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade assessments. When you touch them in primary grades, they do really well. Where the course offerings and the struggles start to emerge and explode is your 6th through 8 program. We've known that, we've talked about it. Part of it's a reality, and part of that is a staff challenge. Staff, not just here, but all across the education sector, are stressed, extensively stressed. And they're facing pressures that career educators like myself didn't have to experience. We had different struggles and different issues, but there is a significant amount of stress that educators are feeling, overloaded, stretched too thin, pressured, just kind of crazy. And it's partially, I think, due to cell phones and technology, and the world it's like drinking from a fire hose on both ends. Okay, and that staff is starting to feel that, and because there's certification issues, there's a ton of interruptions into instruction, which we'll talk about in the report a little bit. But then there's also limitations. If you're stretched too far, you can't take that lesson a little bit further. Even though you have some of the best class sizes around, and that's an enviable position, but if you have low class sizes and you're still stretched too thin, that's going to ultimately start to impact instruction. That's a stressor that all stakeholders, universally, kids, parents, staff, and paraprofessional staff, have recognized. The fact that there's limited co-curriculars and extracurricular activities, particularly for the middle school age kids, they're social creatures by nature. You've already taken incredible strides to backfill that gap, and by all anecdotal accounts, that's having a very positive effect. And the thing that I would say about the optimization study is it's really dealing with the emotional component of the district. It's how you feel, it's how you're connected or not connected. Do you feel a sense of belonging? Do you feel like you're included or left out? And the optimization is really designed and has done remarkably well to gauge that emotional temperature of the district, the mood, the vibe, the feel, the aura. Fill in any word you want in that domain. That's what the optimization study is. And as I said, there was almost universal consensus and agreement of what the good was, what the bad was, and what the ugly was. And when I say ugly, I mean it's a challenge, and that's the financial stress. You heard from Rick last board meeting. You heard from Rick a lot. That's Rick. But his data is spot on. We verified it. We checked also. And everything that goes in the optimization report, as I've told everybody a number of times, it's not just a statement or it's not an observation. Everything in there we can independently verify with another data source. And that's important. The fiscal stress that the district is under is real, it's pressing, and it's not just starting, it is actually constraining your ability as a district to meet the needs of the kids, and it's not going to get better. That is as ugly as it can possibly get in a very challenging economy. So you're doing great with your stakeholders, you're providing an incredible program, but there's a real current of financial stress. And Kyle, if you would be so kind. So what we looked at enrollment data, birth rates, foundation aid, cost per pupil for the local and the county schools, class sizes, compensation rates, aid projections, student achievement, survey responses, and stakeholder interviews. All of that, there were approximately 230 individuals who participated in this process. A significantly high number. That's a huge benchmark that you not only achieved, but you surpassed. There were over 1,000 separate data points that we examined. And when I say data points, we're looking at this as one, this is two. So we're looking at contract data. We're looking at where teachers are at their 5th percentile versus their 90th percentile, and where all of that data came together. It was a massive amount, which is why the report is ending up going to be pretty beefy in terms of its content. And the reason why that's important is because the people that you have trust with and have trust in you believe what you're doing, and that's important, but it's also a little scary because that way you need to make sure as the governing team that you're not leaving anybody behind, kind of like nobody gets left behind. The Marines, like no one gets left behind. You need to make sure that everybody's on the boat with you as you make this journey. And that's really important. Plus, the people that aren't with you don't understand, don't know, haven't taken the time, or want to engage in rumor development. The report, as beefy as it is, should answer virtually every possible, well, what about this, and what about that? It's there. Now, I can't force them, nor can you force them to read it, but it's there. And as a guide, when someone says, well, you know, our teachers need more money, and this isn't popular. Your teachers and your staff are exceptionally well compensated. You may want to look at your paraprofessional staff, because there may be a discrepancy with that. But your teachers are at a pretty high threshold of compensation, which means when someone says, oh, throw more money at the teachers, I'm here to tell you that's you're probably at the top. You couldn't really do that without sacrificing something else that's important. So we took a look at all of those data points, and we kind of coalesced it into an executive summary, which you guys will have relatively soon. So here's kind of your timetable, really. As Rick Tim said, you've got about 36 months. And Mary and I had this conversation. If you tell people you have 3 years, they're going to say, we don't need to do anything now. We got 2 more years. We'll deal with that next year. If you want to make strategic decisions about the district, your 36-month time frame really starts probably at your reorg meeting. And getting forward, as the optimization study is about the emotional stuff, the feasibility stuff is about all the data, the money, the dollars, the cents, the contracts, all of the hard data, absent the emotional connection. Because you've got to balance both of those. And as I've said to some of the board members recently, if you have everyone agreeing that you need to do something different, and if they all agree what that is, but the numbers don't work, it won't work. Conversely, if you have all the numbers that make all the sense, but you don't have the emotional connection, it won't work. So you're on a 36-month time frame, and I would say probably by the end of this summer, if not sooner, you need to make a decision if you're going to go with a feasibility study to look at all of the numbers. We did a 30,000 and then occasionally down to ground level. A feasibility study is ground level, nitty gritty data diving into the weeds with all of the contracts, all of the agreements, the 129 or SA 129 forms of potential partners, and looking at the numbers to see if there is a fit. And that's part of the process. So for that to happen, that's going to be about a 3 to 4 month process, pretty intense, pretty directed. You won't see us a whole lot during that time if you choose to do that and you choose to stay with Schmidt. But that will happen behind the scenes. Then we may zoom in to say, hey, we want to have a meeting and talk about this particular data set. Let's talk about it. The other part with the financial piece is your aid shortfall. Historically in the past, Albany and Washington, D.C. rode into town and saved the day. You should not expect that to happen. Number one, the governor and the legislature, the Assembly and the Senate, consciously chose to not address the foundation aid formula. They tinkered. And by tinkering, it would be my prediction that they are going to make it worse. Not that aid isn't a little higher, and I'll say historic aid levels have never been this high. That's right, they've never been this high. But the cost of doing business has never been this high either. And by tinkering with the two formulas, there's about 30 other left that the Rockefeller Institute recommended. My fear is they'll continue to tinker every year and say historic levels of aid, and we're making progress. Their progress isn't nearly fast enough or nearly enough for small districts like yours to survive for 10 more years. And we know that from Rick's data, we know that from our data. So the aid shortfall plus inflation is a serious window where things will get worse. And you shouldn't expect Albany or DC to come in. Now, interestingly in the survey, and as I've said, this shocked me. 100% agreement, nearly, I think it was 78% of the survey respondents, so 98 people, which probably is 1 or 2 members in the household, said they would be willing to increase their taxes 5% every year indefinitely to meet this budget. That's a super majority. You'd have to override the tax cap. And saying it in a survey don't make it so.
Ain't that the truth?
And now communities will fund what they value, and they value a small school, they value that closeness, they value low class sizes, they value creating more opportunities for kids and more opportunities for staff. That they value, but I think you could probably get away with that once, not 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 times. So the tax pressure is going to further constrict your ability to do it. And under your current financial trajectory, even with maximum levies, you're still going to fall further and further behind, which means you're going to have to compromise some of your core values. And I will tell you, I don't sense that this community will tolerate that. There's no indication that they're willing to say, jack class sizes up. Don't do this. Don't do that. They want what they've come to appreciate and understand. And that means they're requiring on you all, the governance team, to put them in a position where they can understand the information and make an informed choice. Kyle, if you would. So, as I've said, the staff constraints and facility constraints are part of this, assuming nothing else changes for the worse. A large number of students with profound disabilities moving into the district. Transportation shortfalls with buses or drivers. A leaky roof, a blown boiler, or anything like that. Assuming none of those things happen, and we all know they happen, we're still going to be stressed, and that's going to put more pressure on your staff. Role overload is a real thing. Inconsistent teaching, and I don't mean the teachers are inconsistent. I don't mean that. It means that they're in a grade level and then they change. There was a lot of commentary in the survey and the stakeholder interviews that it's becoming more and more challenging because of enrollment trends where they're undulating and they're changing grade levels constantly. That's an added stress that you can get away with it occasionally, but when you've got 1 or 2 sections and then it goes the next year, that's going to come at the expense of instruction. There's increasing burnout. It's getting harder and harder, and Mary and her team has done a great job of filling those 2 middle school positions. If you lose staff and you can't get certified staff, that is going to be gasoline on a lit match in terms of your ability to meet program. And we saw some of that last year. And it's going to get increasingly more challenging to get and recruit and retain staff. Some great commentary in the surveys about ways in which to encourage and recruit staff and retain staff. And once we pulled out paying them more, which doesn't seem feasible given that you're at the top of the step schedule, and a lot of the things that we chose, a lot of the contractual decisions that you've made over time, which are smart decisions, but that only has a limit. It becomes an arms race, and if there's a neighboring district that has a little bit more disposable money, they're going to throw it at teachers, and then you're going to fall further and further behind in the arms race because you don't have the cash. So the competitive pay that you've enjoyed is likely to erode as money gets tighter. From facilities, you've got a great infrastructure, but it's aging, and there's a natural response that you're going to have to start replacing things. Sidewalks, parking lots, you've done some great work with the roofs and stuff, which is a huge hit, but there's unknown facility issues that could creep up. In my district, one year we had a brand new air conditioning unit put in, and it malfunctioned over a long weekend in the summer. And we had 4-day work weeks in the summer. We just did it to give everybody a break. It was great. They put a little bit more time in, and then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we were shut down. The ventilators didn't open. It was incredibly damp and humid. We had mold in every nook and cranny of the building by Tuesday. And we had to shut the school down for 2 weeks. It cost us about $500,000 to remediate. We washed and scrubbed every book, and finally I said, throw the books out. We'll get new books. We got to get the school open. So if you have a facility hiccup, there's another word for it, begins with O and ends with it. That could decimate your budget. And so when you have those facility issues, and just from the student perspective, the students are clamoring for more technology, makerspace, 3D printers, the hands-on learning, and we've talked about the hands-on learning in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade levels. that's what students are expecting moving forward. And for them to be competitive in high school, those are some things that are pressing stressors for the district. Kyle, if you would please. So, as I said, there's an acute awareness of the urgency and reality. Any decision you make moving forward has to align your values. It must reflect your educational mission. It has to be focused on keeping your key players, giving them the resources that they need to do that. And that's not just educators. It's every member of the team. Nobody gets left behind. Any decision you make should weigh the emotional connection and the fiscal advantage. If it's a disadvantage emotionally, but a good advantage fiscally, you need to talk about that publicly so folks understand. If they understand, it's my sense that once they understand, then they will be advocates and ambassadors to do the right thing to preserve this campus. It is abundantly clear that the community wants this campus to remain open. And they're willing to endure a little pain to keep it open. How much depends upon the numbers and how we communicate that to you, and then letting folks have a voice, no surprises, no, oh yeah, by the way, did we tell you that or did we forget to? Like, it's got to be full-throated transparency. And even if it's bad news or difficult news or different news, the hardest conversation is the first. It gets easier. And your community does truly recognize that status quo cannot continue. So as I've said in other districts, one of the things that I'll tell you is, I'll tell you things you shouldn't do. You should not maintain status quo. You have to investigate, explore, inquire, look, share, communicate, and repeat and rinse again until you get that consensus that this is now a decision that needs to be made. Nobody wants to make a decision unless they have to, but if you keep values aligned, staff retention, weigh fiscal and emotional issues, and preserve this campus, I think that will go a long way to community support for what the next step is. Kyle, if you would. So the guiding principles moving forward, absolutely these 5 things. Think of it like a fist or spokes on a wheel. One of these spokes breaks, the ride's going to be bumpy. If 2 or 3 of them break, you're going over the handlebars and you're going to face plant. Everything needs to be student-centered. If you forget that, look at the kids, ask the kids, be around the kids. They will give you clear, unfiltered commentary. It will be salty, it will be funny, but it's a general barometer of what really needs to happen. I've said about the transparency, preserve the identity, fiscally responsible, and this is perhaps the key part. Your mission is everyone in every way, every day together. You can't afford to leave anybody behind. If they disagree with you, don't disregard them. Continue to work with them. Share them information, share with them facts, ask them for a solution, further engage in that commentary so that you can build consensus. If you disregard the naysayers, and there will be naysayers, some will be well educated and just won't want to do it. Others will be less educated and still won't want to do it for all the wrong reasons. Continue to reach out because the people that support you will support you, your family. The ones who don't support you either don't know you, don't understand, and that's why you got to continue to move forward with that. So the last slide I think here is the recommendation is to continue with a full feasibility study, to do detailed analysis on all of the documents, not the people, the documents, contracts, the state aid forms, your demographic information, your birth rates, all of the enrollment data. If it's on a report, that's what a feasibility study is. And then we'll start putting that into a matrix to look at what does the aid do. One of the things that you're going to see in the full report intentionally is we do not call out the other districts that are touching your district by name. We don't say X meaning Troy or Y meaning Averill Park. The numbers speak for themselves because some systems on paper are a great financial fit and others are significantly less, to the tune of between 3-to-1 and almost 10-to-1. So it can't just be about the money. That's part of it. And we'll look at both of those in a full study. We'll have full stakeholder engagement, which means the district administrative staff, it's not going to be so much with the frontline staff dealing with kids, but the business office, your CPA firm, your superintendent with contracts, and we're going to get all of that additional data, and we're going to dive very deeply into that. And there may be reasons where we've got to come in and say, hey, we want to have a conversation. There are stakeholder groups that represent your employees who've expressed a desire to be involved in this process. That's never happened before. From a collective bargaining perspective, you have partners that are here that recognize for their survivability, they want to be part of the conversation. I'm telling you that's unprecedented, and it's because you're family. I will tell you that part of that will be some agreement renegotiations. I've said it before, transportation and tuition. You've got districts charging significantly different amounts. That is something you can't control, not for this year, 25, 26, but 26, 27, and you will still have kids in tuition agreements for a while. And so the rumors of, oh, the middle school is ending in July 1, categorically not true. We're not recommending it, the data doesn't support it. Oh, we're going to merge next year with this district. Absolutely not true. That's not a reality at this point. You've got to do the numbers to see if the numbers match the fit. And then you involve the stakeholders. And part of the feasibility study will be a sustainability timeline. What needs to happen next if you get to that point? It could be immediately, meaning 27, 28, or it could be never. And districts have gone through this process and said, we don't have a willing dance partner, so we're not even going to try. And others have said, yes, we do, and they've done it successfully. So for those on the board or in the community that have a different timeline than that, it's not accurate. And for any reorganization to be successful, if you ever get to that point, which I think you're close, you've got to follow a very methodical, prescriptive timeline, or the way how the statutes are written, if one community says no, then it's game over. So you've got, while the urgency is there, you've got 36 months. And there's a lot that will happen in 36 months. Don't rush it, do it. It's better to do it right than fast. Because fast in this reorganization process almost invariably ends up with the NASCAR driving into the wall at 200 miles an hour. And with a 36-month timetable, which is more than other districts have, because you've made good decisions, you can't afford for a misstep. The report will be to you probably by the end of next week, if not sooner. It's beefy, it's substantive, and I think it's a very accurate representation of your community's understanding that they're asking you to make hard decisions with them.
Do you do the feasibility study?
That's up to you. We do that. We have a team that specializes in school aid, merger, consolidation, reorganization numbers, and that is something that we can do. And if the board decides to go that step, then Brian, who was here last time, can present that stuff and that information to Mary. And if it goes beyond that, what typically happens is districts do the feasibility study, and if the answer is yes, let's move to the next step, then that's merged in and is part of the total reorganization contract.
So you had mentioned that it looked like from the surveys, how do I ask this? From the surveys, we might be able to reach the supermajority. Did you get a sense, was that from the community at whole, or is that from families? Because I don't know if you know where I'm going.
Yeah.
Families will answer a certain way, but the whole community may not.
I believe it was about 73% of the survey respondents indicated they did not have kids in the school. So, and that's typical. That's, you run between 70 and 80% of your community does not have kids in the system. But that doesn't mean they don't support the system. Right? So they don't have. It's probably not a lot of people that don't have kids yet, and probably community members that have kids that have moved on and are older.
They may not have kids,
And-
but they may have grandkids.
Yeah, and the demographics suggest that the connection to the school district is shrinking. And part of the enrollment projections suggest that within about the next 5 to 10 years, your enrollment will probably drop another 40 to 50 kids. And that's just where the metrics are going with the birth rates and everything else through a formulary that we subscribe to. Again, that could change quickly. It's unlikely based on the superficial data that will increase, but you know your community better. You recognize that there's a 200 unit home development that's going in, 3 and 4 bedrooms. You could assume that that's going to be family based versus patio homes, which are not. So that's something that we'll take a look at in terms of the economic development. But I would say most of the respondents were pro-school. Almost no, there were 2 comments that I redacted out, only 2 out of about 700 comments. One mentioned a teacher by name and their certification. I don't think they're accurate, but that got redacted. And the other one was referencing a former employee who, for lack of a better term, walked on water, even though I bet if we dug a little deeper, they probably didn't believe that they actually walked on water. There were several comments that I left in there that spoke favorably of staff, and I figured that's okay. Everybody likes to hear praise. But anything that was critical, but out of 600, 700 survey open-ended responses, that only 2. There are other surveys where I was pretty confident George Carlin or Richard Pryor was on the other end of the key. That shockingly did not happen. But I honestly, I wouldn't put a whole lot of faith in a long-term sustainable commitment to massive, over 5 years, that's 25% compounded, which is probably closer to 30, 31%. I don't think realistically that's sustainable.
Is the survey closed now?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Question for you. The report, 50-page report, what are your thoughts on either boiling that down to summary for the community to digest, right? That's important to kind of
Yeah.
get, we're hearing it here. Right? Is that meant?
You've got a lot of responsibility to go out and tell people.
How do we get the message out and understand where things land?
One of the things that a couple of things. Part of the study is an executive summary. It's about 2 pages. It drills it down. It doesn't get into a ton of detail, but think of it like an annotated bibliography where it gives you a little bit of information, and that I think will help. In my experience, I don't think the average citizen is going to read a 50-plus page report. They're going to flip to the end,
Right.
and see who did it.
Right.
It was, Professor Colonel Mustard in the library with a candlestick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're going to want to see what it looks like. And what I would recommend is taking a look at it at your July meeting, and the tentative plan is to come back in July for your reorg meeting and answer any questions that you might have about it. For clarification or what it means. And I would recommend then deciding on whether or how you're going to proceed. Do you adopt it at the reorg meeting? I would probably not encourage that because it's the first time the community is going to get their eyes on it. But then perhaps in your August meeting, you adopt the report. You receive the report in July, you adopt it in August with what your recommendations are. Feasibility or not, or engage the committee. That's totally your governance purview. But in my experience, you get it, you receive it, you talk about it a little bit, do a press release that it's there, publicly display it, let people look at it. There's not a lot in there that I think from surveys and stakeholder interviews and responses that folks aren't going to say, yeah, I can see that. Yep, I get that. And so not being transparent would be ill-advised, because then some naysayers would be like, see, I told you they were trying
We
to
saw that
hide
with the, hey, you buried the
Yeah.
survey link, right? That
Yeah.
was the immediate reaction.
And when they get to the appendix, there's there's a full page of documents that we've linked to it. So anybody that has the link can click on the link and see the Rick Timms' report. Yeah, I mean, the report is 50 pages. The attachments are probably another 50 pages.
And there are, like, I think there's a handful of folks that will do that, right?
Mhm.
They will go through that analysis, you know, from the community.
Mhm.
Right? Eric is one of them that will, he will go through that and then come up with some of his own thoughts on that. But another question I have for you is, that maybe this is just my feeling, but like fiscally, I feel like we're at risk, right? You've communicated that, Rick Timms has communicated that. Should there be a recommendation or anything like that, like of an immediate decision or anything, or contingency plans? Like, what happens if the boiler goes, right? Like, should we be thinking, or how do you put plans in place to handle a rainy day, right? Because I don't think there's a rainy day fund anymore.
Yeah. Well, you're in good company with that. And no, I wouldn't you can't necessarily make structural changes to your fiscal plan for 25-26. You've adopted it, your voters have approved it, you're kind of stuck with it. But moving forward for budget development for 26-27, yes, you should make some strategic decisions. If Rocco in Buildings and Grounds says, danger, Will Robinson, the boiler's about ready to go.
Yeah.
You know that from your 5-year building condition survey. So you've got a little bit of wiggle room. So short of a meteor hitting the gym, which some of the kids would say it already has because the floor's pivoted. But short of that, I think anything that is so catastrophic, you have contingencies in place. You have some reserve accounts. You have your insurance policies. I wouldn't deviate from what you've done historically because you've been very good stewards of the community's money, assets, and resources. So to now do something catastrophically different, I think you would run the risk of the community saying, see, they're stacking the deck with their thumb on the scale. I think you don't want to do that. And to that extent, I would let the community members go through it. If they have questions, give them my number. And say, you know what, the report is what the report is. If you have a direct question, like I'm pretty confident saying anybody who wanted to contribute something to the report had multiple opportunities to. And if now post-report they want to have their voices heard, absolutely, dial them in, give them my number.
Yeah. I just, again, just going back on that point is, we're doing this over the summertime, right? A lot of people are not paying attention to the social media feed or anything like that,
Yeah.
so maybe it's like a September announcement or something.
I would suggest, like, because you'll have it by early part of next week.
Okay.
You may want to have for Mary and Shannon to have a faculty meeting and just say, the report is here. The board has not adopted it, so we'll send it to you in draft form, and then the board can adopt it. And you can give a quick overview of that, or if we need to dial in for a faculty meeting, we can certainly take a Zoom and say, here's what we've found. The more you communicate, the less likely the critics are going to say, you didn't tell me. Now, they will say I didn't understand it, but they shouldn't ever say you never told me.
Does a feasibility study, does that reach conclusions, or is that a presentation of data more in that angle?
It will tell you who a good partner is
Okay.
fiscally if you decide to take the next step, which is a reorganization.
Okay.
And the report talks about, and I labeled them A, B, C, and D, and I didn't do them alphabetically. Not because I'm, that smart. It's just that's how they were listed, and they weren't listed in numeric order either. But one district's aid through an incentive aid is approximately $240 million, and another one is in the low 30s. So fiscally, that doesn't help you. Then we'd have two systems stressed, now one system that's still the same amount of stress. Fiscally, that wouldn't necessarily get you any further. Another district, 75 million, and I think there was another one that was 48 million, but don't quote me on that. The top was 240 and the bottom was 35, if I recall. It is incentive to equalize things for contracts, and a portion of that will go to equalize tax levies. That's 90% of what kills reorganizations, because the community A loves their district and loves their tax rate, although nobody loves their tax rate, but we're throwing another person on top of that, that can throw that all off, and kind of go asunder. But the data for the finances will really tell you, Michael, is there a good, viable dance partner that you may want to ask to the dance? And then, if that's the case, and then that district might partner as part of a feasibility study to look at theirs if they're interested, and usually that's what happens. And then if the emotions say, hey, let's proceed, and the finances say, let's proceed, then the real interesting stuff talks about how long do we get to keep the building open. And there's rampant examples of districts merging and loving each other and saying, yes, we're going to keep the buildings open, and then the next year they close it. That's, I don't think, a good ethical plan. And other systems say, you know what, we want to be one district, and they build a new building, the small rural systems. And other districts have different priorities, and that's when the boards get together, the superintendents get together, business officials get together, sometimes all together, sometimes individually, and say, what are your hopes, dreams, wishes, and aspirations? And you already know some of them from the presentation. This community would expect this building to stay open. And so if you have a partner and it works, and they say, well, we'll commit to that for a year or two, I'm not sure your community will go for it. And that's part of what the feasibility gets to, is who's a potential partner. And then after that, then the merger study begins, where you start to merge the systems to see, will the community support it? You're not there yet.
And the feasibility study will also look, so we're focusing on the financial, but what about like enrichment, course, all that? We'll look
Yep.
at all that stuff
Yep.
and kind of, okay.
Program, curriculum, finances, collective bargaining agreements, tax levies, tax rates, building condition surveys, and we
Okay.
mush whatever your district is, we mush it with another district, and we layer them side by side and say, one of the districts, I think I shared this with Mary yesterday, if you were to do a capital project, the boiler goes. One district would get about 95% of that paid by the state. The other district would get in the low 60s. That's a financial difference that long-term does make a difference.
Yeah. Okay.
One district has 98% aidability for transportation, and the other is about 90%. Two different districts in both of those examples. Now, you know, think that 9-10%, that's not a big deal, but if electric buses come on, we didn't even talk about electric buses. I mean,
Yeah.
we could,
The kids
sweet
can
Lord.
walk.
Yeah.
I don't
but-
want to hear what Rick Tim is taking.
yeah. I mean, you say electric buses, every superintendent, retired or not, starts twitching, and then every business official already needs CPR. So there's stressors out there that are going to happen no matter what you do, even in your best planning. But you want to look at the numbers in such a way that you can answer any reasonable question. And you know, and I'll end with this. So take two systems, A and B, C and D, A and B, whatever. If this building closes, that new district is going to then have a significant transportation bill on their hands that, according to Mike, and according to everything I know about transportation, you can't find drivers and you can't staff routes. And transportation contracts are massively expensive, and they're not going to get cheaper. And so balancing and keeping this campus open at the expense of more transportation that you can't fulfill gets to that transportation insolvency quotient that is a reality. It's not like the old days. And parents probably are not going to just transport their kids independently with any type of validity.
Now, what is your experience with schools going through all this, and we do the merger study and all of that? It has to go up to the voters for a vote. We've gone that route before years ago to merge with Troy. Absolute no back in that day. And I will admit, at that time, I was a no voter. Now it would probably be a different story, knowing what I know now, rather than what I knew that many years ago. But then, so you put all that work into it, and then it's voted down. Where do you go from there?
That's a good question, and districts do
I thought
struggle
so.
with that, and, I guess the best counsel I can share is, that's why you can't get ahead of yourself. You gotta take it one step at a time, and the optimization tells you the emotional recognition that change has to come in some way, shape, or form. But only with transparency, only with preservation of philosophy and mission, only with benefiting kids. And if you do those things, then you'll start to build consensus on something that happens next. When these things fail, and they fail horrifically sometimes, because one district gets ahead of themselves at the expense of the other district. Both systems, and we talked about this about 3 weeks ago with the commissioner at a conference that I ran, and they're not in a position, sometimes it would be easier if you took the district, split it in half, and this half went here, and this half went over here. That's not permissible by statute. 3 districts would have to merge, and that's not gonna happen, not under the current statutes. So, I guess, Kathy, the best counsel I can give is go slow, be transparent, ask for input, and listen to that input as a guiding force. And when that happens in systems, it can work very well. One of our, the gentleman that works with us, Josh Myers, has had success as a merger superintendent, and has been in systems that have tried to do this, and it's not gone well. What happens afterwards is the system is really at a disadvantage competitively because of finances. And right now, there are going to be more districts looking at mergers, and there's a lot of money there from the state, and that could go away.
Yeah.
I don't know what the state would do if a district is insolvent. It's never happened. And kind of, Eric, as you said, if the boiler goes and you don't have the money, then you go to your elected officials. You lobby, you call them in now. You want an elected official, a politician, when you have no issues, because you will need an issue, and you want to be able to pick up the phone and call your assembly member, your Senate member, your congressman or woman, or your New York State senator, or your federal senator, Schumer or Gillibrand, and say, we need your help. Don't do that when the boiler goes. Do that well before. You've got what they crave and need, kids, publicity. They have what you crave and need, access to funds.
Because I don't see this community being one that will vote for budgets with continued increases. They may say yes in this survey that they're totally anonymous in, but when they get to the voting booth,
Yep.
and the seniors in this town, I constantly hear as a senior from why do we still have to pay taxes?
Yeah.
I'm like, well, who paid for your kids when they were in school? Other seniors did. So it's like, I understand it's a hardship for many, but it is what it is.
And you've been very conscientious stewards of the community's money. That's clear. You've made good choices in a world that there aren't a lot of good options sometimes.
That was one of the highlights of Tim's report last month, was for him to say that Belle and Mary have done such an awesome job of guarding the money and doing the right things with it, investing it the right way. So that was so good to hear, and I hope they felt good about it, because we know we're on the right track. It's just how soon before we derail.
Any other discussion points on that? Thank you very much.
Thank you.